He claimed that he already thought of her as dead at that point, so he first attempted to smother her, then strangled her. Hello there and welcome, I hope you are doing well. My name is Gabby, and in today's video we'll be going through the heartbreaking and very cruel case of Christian Longo and his family. If you enjoy true crime, consider subscribing to the channel. I release new videos every week, but for now, let's get into the video. On the 19th of December 2001, a grisly discovery was made in a marina at Waldport, Oregon. The body of a small boy floating face down in the water. The police were called and the boy's digitally enhanced photo was quickly released to the media in an effort to find someone who could identify him. It was successful and the boy was soon identified as 4-year-old Zachary Longo by a couple who had occasionally babysat him and his younger sisters. Divers searched the shallow water where Zachary was found, and 3 days after the discovery of the little boy's body, they found the body of a little girl that was weighed down with a rock in a pillowcase tied to her ankle. The girl was later identified as Zachary's 3-year-old sister Sadie Longo. Further searching by the divers in the surrounding waterways resulted in the discovery of 2 suitcases under a dock at an adjacent marina on the 27th of December. One suitcase contained the body of 2-year-old Madison Longo, some clothing and a dumbbell. The other contained the remains of the children's mother, 34-year-old Mary Jane Longo. Autopsies determined that all 4 victims had died of asphyxia, with some disputed evidence that Zachary and Sadie had drowned. There was also evidence of blunt force trauma on the face of Mary Jane. The only member of the family whose body hadn't been discovered, the father, 27-year-old Christian Longo, was initially sought for questioning as a potential witness, but Christian was nowhere to be found, and by the 28th of December he'd become the prime suspect in the murder of his family and was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. On the 27th of December 2001, an American tourist met a man at a Cancun hostel they were both staying at. The man initially gave the name Brad, but later said it was Mike. On the 11th of January 2002, after returning to the USA, the tourist called the FBI's headquarters to inform them of the man in Cancun who she'd recognised as Christian Longo after seeing publicity regarding the case. By that time, Christian had left the hostel, but an appeal for information in Mexico soon resulted in the authorities locating him at a beach camp in a small town of Tulum, Mexico, where he was living with Janina Frank, a German travel photographer, under the name Michael Christian, while claiming to be a travel writer. Upon being approached by a group of Mexican police officers and FBI agents, Christian confirmed his identity and was arrested without incident. He then agreed to be transported to Cancun from there and board a plane back to the USA. He arrived in Houston the morning of the 14th of January 2002 and was formally taken into custody by the FBI. Following his arrest, Christian detailed, while being questioned, his version of the days following his family's death, but stopped short of providing a confession. According to Christian, after the 16th of December, he tried to distract himself by renting a movie, going to the gym and attending his job's Christmas party, where he told co-workers that his wife had left him for another man. After hearing that the body of a child had been found at the marina, he collected his last paycheck and drove to San Francisco. Soon after that, he left the country on the day that Mary Jane and Madison's bodies were discovered, flying to Cancun under the stolen identity of former New York Times writer Michael Finkel. Allegedly, he admitted to a federal agent that his looks and speaking skills had helped him get away with countless crimes. Whether or not the admission actually occurred, the long history of crime most definitely did. Christian Longo was born in Michigan to Jehovah's Witness parents and grew up to be actively involved in the church himself. When he was 19, he married Mary Jane Baker, who was 7 years his senior after meeting her in a church parking lot. The marriage led to his first known foray into crime when, unable to afford one of the monthly payments for Mary Jane's engagement ring, he stole $108 from the camera store where he worked. He later claimed that he'd regretted it the next morning and left a check for the money on the store's counter, along with his resignation. When his church found out about the incident, he was sanctioned and he claimed to be repentant and to have learnt his lesson. However, his behaviour in the following years said otherwise. Christian's love of cars, nice clothes and tropical vacations had burned through most of his money and credit by the time his son Zachary was born, and the financial situation got worse when Mary Jane quit work to look after the baby. Over the following few years, 2 daughters, Sadie and Madison, were born, and the family's finances continued to deteriorate, although no one would have thought so from Christian's spending habits. When the construction cleanup business he'd started with a fellow Jehovah's Witness ended up in debt, he kept up appearances by wildly exaggerating its success to relatives and church members, being so convincing in doing so that he got his own father to invest tens of thousands of dollars. Soon after, he bought 2 new cars and showed off a boat and 2 jet skis that he claimed to have won in a competition. But his lies could only do so much. One morning he awoken to a tow truck that had come to repossess his Ford Taurus. When the family's other car broke down, Christian's solution to the problem was to make a fake driver's license under another name, present it at a dealership where he asked to take a Pontiac Montana for a test drive, and just never returned the car. When his wife questioned why they weren't receiving any billing statements for the new car, he made fake ones on his computer and mailed them to his home address. Soon he moved on to making counterfeit checks that were supposedly from clients of his company and cashing them. This time his crimes caught up with him. The companies in question contacted the police and Christian was subsequently arrested. He pled guilty, receiving 3 years probation, and because he greatly exaggerated his income to keep up appearances of success, he was ordered to pay restitution payments that he couldn't afford. When his church found out about his crimes from a local newspaper, he was kicked out. Things hadn't been going too well in other aspects of his life either. In May 2000, Mary Jane discovered emails from her husband to another woman and confronted him about it. Allegedly, he responded by saying that she hadn't been any fun since having children and didn't love her anymore. Nevertheless, Mary Jane stayed with her husband. Following his arrest and trial for the counterfeiting and the resulting consequences, he promised his wife that he'd be truthful from then on and straighten out their finances. But instead he obtained a credit card in his father's name without his knowledge and ran up almost $100,000 in debt. Eventually, a combination of too many questions from concerned friends and church members and Christian being hounded by his creditors drove Christian to violate the terms of his probation by moving with his family from Michigan to a warehouse in Toledo, Ohio. Christian claimed that it was to make a fresh start and that he was going to turn the warehouse into a proper home. Instead, the family lived with inadequate plumbing and no kitchen while Christian lied to his wife about the rent already being paid for the next 6 months and forged and cashed more checks. Despite the situation and her sister's concern when she'd managed to track the family down, Mary Jane continued to refuse to leave her husband. Soon the family left Toledo to avoid Christian being charged for passing bad checks and receiving stolen construction equipment. They stayed on the move, going from one campsite or motel to another in stolen vehicles. Christian later claimed that Mary Jane was unaware of just how bad the situation was, even when they had to sell her wedding ring for just a few $100s. Eventually, the family ended up in Oregon, where they stayed at a small vacation house in Waldport until they fell behind on the rent a few weeks later. Christian responded by pawning some stolen fishing equipment and using money to move his family to a room in a motor inn before obtaining a condo by convincing the complex manager that he was a telephone company employee awaiting a paycheck. Although the lie allowed the family to move into the $1,500 a month property without spending any money up front, they obviously couldn't pay the rent, even after Christian got a part-time job at Starbucks, where, Due to the endless need to keep up the appearance of being successful, he told everyone that he had a lucrative internet business and only took the part-time job because he liked the coffee. Rent wasn't paid, groceries often went unbought, and the family was generally constantly running out of money. Eventually, on the 16th of December 2001, Christian realised that they would soon lose the condo. He later described that night as being the beginning of the end. Before his trial, Christian made the unexpected move of pleading guilty to the deaths of Mary Jane and Madison without a plea deal. However, he denied being responsible for the deaths of Zachary and Sadie. During the trial, he claimed that after confessing the truth of their financial situation to his wife, she had become angry, berated him, and slapped him. The following morning, on the 17th of December, he offered to stay at home from work and look after the children so she could have some time to herself, but she ordered him to go to work, apparently. Upon returning from work, Christian claimed he found Madison lifeless on the bed, after which he flew into a rage and first tried to shake an answer about what had happened out of Mary Jane, who said that the other two children were in the water. He then strangled her. He then set about disposing of the bodies, but when he went to Madison, he realised that she was still breathing. However, he claimed that he already thought of her as dead at that point, so he first attempted to smother her, then strangled her, before packing her body into a suitcase along with her clothes to make it more comfortable. He packed Mary Jane in another suitcase, then threw them into the water behind the condo. It was a version of events that the prosecution did their best to disprove, pointing out that the 110-pound Mary Jane would have been physically incapable of dumping her children into the water with heavy rocks attached. They contended that Christian had simply decided that his family was a burden and cold-heartedly killed them, presenting evidence that he'd planned the murders months in advance, which included a website on methods of murder called Hitman Online in his computer's internet history. Christian deliberately isolating Mary Jane from her relatives and even misleading them as to her location by sending a birthday card from another state, and the way that personal items such as family photos, clothing, and the children's baby books had been discarded long before the murders. There was also a witness who reported seeing a man in a minivan matching Christian's description on the Lindeslau Bridge in the early hours of the 17th of December 2001, which prosecutors contended was when the bodies of Zachary and Sadie were thrown into the water. Additionally, a couple staying at the same condo complex had complained to the management the following day about loud dragging sounds coming from the neighbouring room the night before. The jury clearly believed the prosecution's version of events more than Christian's, finding Christian guilty of the aggravated murders of Zachary and Sadie after less than 4 hours of deliberation, with one juror commenting that Longo's own testimony was what did him in. For the murders of all 4 members of his family, Christian Longo was sentenced to death by lethal injection. After the trial, he appealed, a process that can take 5 to 10 years. However, in 2011, he admitted to the murders. He remains incarcerated on death row at Oregon State Penitentiary. While Oregon still has the death penalty, all executions have been suspended since 2011. So it's unknown when, if ever, the most final part of his sentence will be carried out. So that was the case of Christian Longo and how, unfortunately, his family paid the price for his numerous lies, his crimes, and never-ending ambition to be seen as something he was most definitely not. In the end, he blamed his family rather than himself for the situation he was in, and obviously felt that murdering them was the best form of action, which worryingly seems to be quite a common theme amongst men that get rid of their families in that way. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so if you enjoy my videos. But until I see you again, please be safe, be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.